we talk about the relationships and the trust that you have to build. If you wear your ego on your shoulders, right, no matter what the situation, but especially during when you're spending people's time and resources, right, and you can't overcome your own ego and hubris to admit when you're wrong, that's gonna show pretty obvious pretty quickly to people, and you're gonna lose their trust.
Welcome to the Ocean of Technology podcast,
where we bring on real experts to talk about
real technology, real deep.
I'm Nate Samuels.
And I'm Joshua Williams.
And we're your hosts.
We always like to start it off with introductions, so tell us who you are.
Sure. So I'm Brian Fricke. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer here at City National Bank of Florida, here in Miami, Florida. I've been here at this organization a little over a year now. My prior organizations, I was with City National Bank out in California, BBVA, which was bought by PNC, that was in Birmingham, Alabama. And then prior to that at Bank of the Ozarks, which is now Bank OZK. They're based out of Little Rock, but I was based out of St. Petersburg, Florida, for a bit with them. And then prior to that, I was actually in the federal government space. And then prior to that, I was active duty Marines. So I've gone from a sergeant in the Marines to a CISO out down here in Miami, Florida. And it's been quite a journey.
I know our viewers and listeners are probably going to be like, hey, these guys keep bringing out people from cybersecurity that comes from military type backgrounds.
Yeah, you do see that a lot. You don't have to be from a military background or government background, but in about, what was it, 2012, 2013, cyber became a domain of warfare, right? Air, land, sea, space. So cyber was codified in that way. They applied doctrine, they applied funding, and they applied all the disciplines that are necessary to operate in that space. And I was at the right time in the right place, coming from military and being in government, where the opportunity presented itself, and I had been studying these different domains, and so it just worked out to where the intersectionality, right? And then from there, I got more formalized education, and really, what was most important in my transition from doing kind of IT operations and information security and government to being like a CISO, it was really not about just who I knew, but who thought of me when the opportunity arose. So somebody had reached out to me. I was finishing up my MBA at GW there in Washington, D.C., and they needed a CISO at a small $8 billion bank. And I was like, okay, I'm ready for this challenge. And sure enough, it worked out, and that kind of sparked my career going forward.
Here we are.
Yeah.
So I'll throw it over to you, Nate. So what is the topic that we're going to be talking about today, Nate?
Yeah, this is leadership buy-in as a strategy. Very often, I mean, we were just talking about Southwest Airlines, for example. So they had their operational technology fail. They had a gap, I think, for about an hour, and they lost some operational data. And ultimately, it comes down to a legacy system that wasn't upgraded. Obviously, somebody on the security side was like, this could be a problem, and probably was bringing it up to management, and it was probably a tabletop exercise several times before this actually happened. So, but the real driver of why this particular upgrade didn't happen, or what would be a strategy around if you were in that position, how to help your organization understand the value of going through a transformative process like that. That is kind of where this podcast is aimed to direct at.
I mean, in that scenario, and we don't know all the specifics of how and why and all that stuff, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt in a lot of ways. But assuming it was, exactly as you described, and it was just a legacy system that had not been upgraded and was a failure of that type, business continuity, disaster recovery testing, right? Those kinds of activities are critical. But it's really, you have to assess the risk, right? Across all of your different systems, you have to understand what are your key business processes before you even start talking about the technology, right? What are my critical processes? What are the workarounds potentially if any part of that process fails? And business applications, that's their main function, is to facilitate a business process, right? So having a solid inventory of what are those critical business processes, what are the underlying applications that support those business processes, and then further down, what are the servers and databases that support that business application that supports that critical business process, right? and that's where, and let's say it was that they needed to update a database or upgrade a server and get off a legacy environment, and they just maybe kept getting the no, right? No, not yet. Next year. That does put their systems in jeopardy, and it's incumbent upon the management to bring that up as a risk, right? There's a lot of risks we're dealing with, and so business continuity risk can sometimes take a back seat at times. And I can see how, potentially that may have happened in this situation, and it was not maybe given the right priority, right, when it comes to those things. So it's hard to say as specifically why, but let's say it wasn't just a legacy system that didn't get upgraded. Could have been a ransomware incident. Could have been any sort of, you typically want to take an all hazards approach when you evaluate these types of systems. But it has to rise up in the right priority level, on the risk chart on the board, right? When you're briefing to management, briefing the board of directors, wherever that information is feeding out to. So I could see how that it led to, and here in this case, right, led to a major outage, which caused not only operational issues but also reputational damage, right? So it can many things can stem from that one incident.
And I mean, this wasn't the first time either. Like that's the even more crazy part. So another thing that they mentioned that upon digging deeper, a lot of these news outlets don't want to cover the tech, so you have to like really dive in. So it was a web application firewall that actually went down. It was vendor provided, MSP provided, and the firewall went down, and then boom, catastrophe, all flights grounded basically after this operational data was kind of let go. I guess where we want to try and guide this conversation is if you were in, I mean, and you are sort of in that transformational space where you came in about a year ago and there were a lot of projects hitting the ground running. How do you prioritize, then how do you project to management the value? And that's kind of what the questions we're going to ask are around.
Well, one of the primary functions that a CISO provides is to be that technology risk executive, right? To understand what are the risks that we're dealing with, what are potential mitigation strategies, and to craft mitigation opportunities and remediation, for most of them through projects and initiatives, right? Initiatives being the things you can do kind of internally with your own resourcing and your own staff. You can take on different initiatives, whereas projects might require a much broader enterprise, support funding, or project manager that can support that, or multiple business units who might be affected, especially when you talk about the support between the two organizations of like your information security teams and your technology teams and your application teams all working together to achieve the outcome that's needed. So the first step is always to understand what are my key assets, what are my critical applications, and then to do those risk assessments to understand, actually do some control testing, do the evaluations, and understand where are my biggest risks to the organization. We're here to support the needs of the business, right? And we have to make sure they understand what is their risk by line of business. Certain lines of business might be customer facing, others may be internal. Each one is going to have a different risk profile. And so understanding, what's important to them, right? And then building out that, building the business case, right? It really comes down to that. If there's no solid business case for spending the time and the effort and the money and the resourcing to get that done, it's going to be put on hold, right? It's going to be the can might get kicked down the road, right? And that's a fair trade-off, but they have to also understand there is risk acceptance coming with this, right? If I identify an application that needs to be upgraded and they keep saying, no, not yet, I need to document that, right? I document that in a risk acceptance, and I try to quantify that risk as best I can. If we know the application supports, revenue of $1 million a year, $10 million a year, whatever it might be, I need to start to do some math around the risk quantification. If it does fail, right, it goes out, how much does that cost us per hour, per day, per month? And then you can start to do the cost benefit analysis of, is it worth upgrading? What's the likelihood that thing may go down? And there's a whole discipline around the risk management activities that need to occur. And that all of that wrapped into your risk acceptance discussion, right? And most people, they don't want to sign off and accept risk right? If you can do a good job at defining it and putting it on paper and presenting it to management and the board, that's when they may rethink. And then we're doing a better job as information security and technology executives. We're doing a better job by communicating that risk in business terms, right? Not just OMG, we need to upgrade it, but specifically how it might affect the company from a revenue generating perspective. That's when you get a lot better, a lot smoother conversations around, should we be doing this or not? Should we make these investments or not? So I think the maturity of your risk assessment process really is really one of the key tools in your toolbox to get those projects kicked off.
And I kind of want to pitch this in the light of kind of based on the scenario that Nate was talking about, where the legacy system, right? And let's say that it reached a certain amount of risk, right? But it never was escalated, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we build those sponsors to get the right escalation for these initiatives that need to be driven?
Yeah, that starts with your relationships, right? Just because you are the chief of anything, right, won't get you that far. I mean, it definitely, there's some weight that comes with it, but you've got to build those relationships with the line of business executives, with your risk executives. We're in the financial services space. We have chief risk officers, we have chief audit officers, we have individuals in key positions that can really help bring and highlight, what these risks might be and what they mean to the organization. But even if you don't go straight to them, working directly with the affected stakeholders, right? Building that relationship, understanding what they're trying to achieve, right? Maybe they are already over budget for the year and they don't know what to do next, right? You can have a broader conversation. You can say, how can we, what other steps can we take to mitigate the impact, right? It isn't always maybe that and also you don't want to come with just one solution, right? You want to try to bring that bronze, silver, gold, platinum, right? Give them options that might scale up. The perfect solution being replace the thing, right? And maybe the most minimal is to update your backup procedures and make sure you've got a disaster recovery plan and do some tabletops around that. Do what you can, right? And offer what you can to help mitigate those risks.
So I've taken away so far 3 main takeaways that basically everything you're saying. First, do the due diligence. And in the process of doing the due diligence, before you come to the table, make relationships with people so that you understand what they're going through. The second thing that I would say is know thy audience. Who are you presenting to? How do you speak their language and get them on board? And then the third thing is, on the solution side, don't just come with the problem, come with an array of solutions that they can identify with.
That's right, because anybody can call out, hey, you missed a spot, or hey, this is a bad thing, or that, that's loose, or this is going to be a problem. But when you actually have something that's a little more thought through, right, I think people appreciate that more. That's really why you're there. You're not there just to find the problems. You're there to come up with solutions that improve the quality of the organization. So I think you're getting the right nuggets out of all of this. So yeah, that's good.
I love the fact that it all starts with kind of understanding your counterparts within the business and actually building these relationships with them. From your personal experience, Brian, how did you kind of start off building this trust and these relationships with your counterparts in the business?
It is difficult. I can very often find myself, in the weeds or in the depths of my work, kind of siloed. And it takes deliberate action, right? You have to schedule those meetings. You have to take time when a meeting adjourns. Maybe you're in person, or ideally in person, right? A meeting might adjourn, and go up and communicate with them. Talk to them. How are you doing? Let's have coffee. Let's have lunch, right? Create those informal opportunities to engage, not just at the committee meeting, right? And again, it takes deliberate steps, and I think everybody, whoever's listening to this, and anyone will tell you, we're always trying to work on that part of ourselves and improve that. I think a lot of times, especially when you're brand new in an organization, you might have that imposter syndrome a little bit, and you feel a little shy just based on that. Like you'd be like, can I just walk up to this executive and start talking to them? Yes, you can. Most people want to meet you. They want to talk to you about, what it might be. You want to have kind of an agenda. What do you want to get out of that relationship? Primarily when you start, it's understanding them, understanding where they've come from and what they're trying to achieve within their line of business, and how you can kind of align with their priorities. Again, we are information security teams are here to prevent the erosion of revenue, right? We want the organization to succeed. And so the more that you build those connections with your line of business leads, the more they'll understand and appreciate what you're doing for them and find out the pain points, right? There could be other pain points I might be able to resolve for them that are unrelated to what I'm trying to achieve for them, right? So there's a bit of that trade-off, understanding their needs, so that they can help me meet my needs.
So I would say that, I guess, a fifth point to take away from that, right? I had 4 before, right?
We
So
added
this is
another
number
one,
5.
tacked on one more.
So fifth one is something that I think is in larger organizations rather than smaller organizations, and that is, how do you delegate? Wow, how do you delegate responsibility to people that you need to help carry out the work, to help you pitch to upper management? Because there's only so many people you can trust with that sort of stuff, and there's only so much time you have in the day to sit through meetings and do the back legwork.
Another great tactic and approach, whether if I was a CIO or as a CISO, is in the information security side, you often hear of a BISO, a business information security officer. On the IT side, it might be like a product or line of business liaison of some sort, right? And creating a structure where you have your staff understand how to communicate with them, with the different lines, and establishing really routine communication and partnerships, right? You're right. One head can't maybe be in every single meeting, and they can't be all places all times. But establishing at least that almost customer service kind of relationship, right? If you need anything, John Doe, he's going to be your direct, contact for information security needs. I may not always be available, but you can always go to John and I, and we will try to figure out, what the problem is, because that's probably another big takeaway, maybe, is understanding that they don't know everybody in the IT and the InfoSec organization and who to go to solve their problem. They have a problem, and they just know that they can't fix it, and it's somebody in the technology space that fixes it. Could be something as simple as getting emails, sensitive data over to clients, right? It could be about legacy technology issues that are causing outages, those kinds of things. They don't know how to navigate the technology organization, maybe. So if you build some liaisons, right, identify people on your team who are capable of communicating at that level, right? And maybe even create some templates and help coach your own staff to work with those people. Those liaisons can pay dividends in getting their buy-in and their trust that, hey, this organization does care about us in the line of business, and they are here to help me. So I think that's another angle, is to try to set up that almost customer service facing approach with no matter who your directs are. Right?
There is a point within. I maybe we'll make this the 6th point here, right? But there's something synonymous around the board, and what you're talking about. And a lot of our clients on the director level side, whenever they join a new company, they don't, instead of talking about the imposter syndrome, they usually talk about, hey, I need to focus on understanding the landscape of where I'm at right now, understanding the existing problems and assessing the problems currently happening, and then making sure I meet every team member so they know. And maybe that's just great directions. And maybe all the directors I spoke to are great, but most of the directors I speak to around the board all say the same thing.
Yeah.
Understanding the landscape, meeting the team members, understanding existing problems. Is that kind of how you when you took on these new roles at these different large and medium-sized banks that you joined, is that kind of what you did as well when you joined?
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, it's actually a great tactic during your interview process, right? To try to, if you're going to ask questions, which everyone should have some sort of questions ready to go to ask at the end of the interview, is to really try to understand what are their current challenges, right? What would they consider to be a successful candidate is one thing, but trying to suss out what are they currently wrestling with, right? If you can do that at the interview process, that really shows that you care about what they're dealing with, right? And then day one, you might have a 90-day plan or whatever it is that you're gonna however you approach it. Have those meetings, right? Set those meetings up with those executives and directors, and do the introductions, and then get a regular cadence. Could be once a month, once a quarter, whatever the right. You'll have to feel out the organization. Very cultural driven, right? But those 3 bullet points, I think, are excellent ones as well. Yep.
And it's funny that you say that, because it's not only on the client side that you want to do that, but you also, not only on the candidate side that you want to do that, we also want to do that on the client side as well. When you're speaking with the client and you're asking them the question, what happens if you can't get this role fulfilled, right?
Yeah.
How does that affect your job? How does that affect the project? what are the liabilities that are risking on these couple positions? And then you see, you know, these large consultancies scrambling to find another partner to try to fulfill it because they know the liabilities that stand there, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's why, whether it be like project risk, or when you're engaging with them to try to understand, what are my alternatives? What is my plan B? What is my plan C? If this can't, if plan A fails, or things happen, right? Life happens, but just having the foresight to think through that and communicate that, and have some notes jotted down on how you might work through those challenges. Same with business continuity, right? It's a project continuity, if you will. So, yeah.
So I would love to hear from your standpoint, kind of take us through a typical, I guess, CISO. Take us through a typical CISO project proposal. What does
Yeah.
it look like? How long does it take? Are you ever running against the clock where you're like, oh man, I don't know if we can do this, get this approved in time so we could do this, or whatever the case may be. Take us through the kind of budget approval process. What does that look like?
In an ideal situation, you're going to have a strong project management office who's going to have really well defined, intake processes, which include developing a business case. I think that's really where it starts, is having a really clear problem statement. The having the alternatives matter as well. In fact, they call it like an analysis of alternatives, or that's often a part of building a business case. Just because you have the best idea, because it's yours, doesn't mean it's the only way to maybe resolve a particular challenge. And you have to look at that, bronze, silver, gold, platinum kind of approach. So I think putting together a proper business case, identifying your co-sponsors for that project is another key component. Just tooting the horn about some problem and how to solve it with one approach, not going to work, right? So having executive sponsors who back you, especially because you're going to go typically to some sort of project steering committee. So you don't want to just be there for the first time, your own boss and their peers all looking at you like, oh, this is the first time I've ever heard of this problem, right? You want to kind of cultivate that on the back end, right? And glean all that support. It's very much like politics, right? You've got to kind of advocate for yourself and for this particular effort. Even then, one thing I want to clarify is, information security organizations aren't doing vanity projects. So even if you say, look, it's important because it's security related, that's great, right? But you still need to go and get the buy-in from those executives, even if they know and respect that, hey, he does important work, or he or she, the CISO does important work. You've got to get that executive buy-in first. That will really help you when it gets to committee. The budgeting side, sometimes you may not have the full budget, but if you've got some and you can make some trade-offs, or if you can get another line of business to maybe pitch in, right? I think executives are more willing to pay a little bit of it, right, than take on the full cost. So if you can kind of tag more than one stakeholder to that project, you're doing even better, right? So you put together your business case, you submit that in, and then you advocate during the project. A lot of times you'll do some pre-analysis. So they may say, okay, this is in pre-approval stages or some sort of initiation phase. And that's where you go get the details, right, of your cost scope schedule, and you start really fleshing out, what is it going to take to do this, to resolve this, and just try to be detail oriented, but you can't get mired in the weeds, and you're going to lose your audience, right? So you want to stay high enough level where the executives understand what they're investing in, what the outcome is. I think critical success factors is often discussed at that time, where you're saying, what does success look like as an outcome of this effort? What's the tangible outcome, the tangible artifacts that will show that this was a success? Often, if it's a really big problem, you may not be able to get the whole thing solved. So try to break it into waves, right? You can always call something phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, right? So you can bite size it to where it's a little more palatable for an organization. If it's brand new territory, maybe you're leaning into, you definitely want to have more of a pilot, right, or a proof of concept. Those are other ways you can get seed funding or do some initial baby steps to prove it out. I think you'll get a lot of lessons learned from that. Failing often is okay if you're in one of those kind of modes, but failing is not good if you've gotten, if you went full bore and you got all the funding for the project, and you get one shot at that point, right? So be thoughtful on how you might approach it, and be mindful of the organization, right? The money they give you to spend, they're taking away from some other opportunity, right? The opportunity cost. So just be a good steward of that and be mindful of the impact that your project isn't maybe the only most important thing, right? I think with all those kind of different approaches, you'll end up seeing a lot of success and lessons learned, and you'll build more allies too. You often hear about the quick wins, so try to identify some of those within the scope of your proof of concept or your phase one. Try to see what is that low hanging fruit that you can resolve and cure quickly. So I think if you were to take a lot of all those little elements come to bear, bring those to bear, you'll find that you're having a successful project execution. So.
I love that you kind of went through like how you kind of build that case. There's something that's always been curious to me. And I spoke with the director more recently, and he was telling me he worked at one of these large banks, right? And he was trying to go from the waterfall methodology to the agile methodology, and he created an entire roadmap of all the signatures that he needed to get signed for a new app development at this large bank. He put it down, and it was 32 signatures.
Wow.
So yeah, I know, insane, right? And he's like,
Yeah.
how are we gonna go from this waterfall to agile methodology when I need 32 signatures? I'm banging my head against the wall trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, in this process and these initiatives, is it easier when you start, becoming a CISO, a C-suite level executive, to get your initiatives pushed comparatively with the director, or do you still have to get all those signatures?
Well, no, I mean, of course, the size of the organization, the impact of the project, right? So I think that's another key component, right? How many stakeholders are going to be affected by your effort? It sounds like I don't know all the details of that situation, but being able to negotiate, right? And like I said, building those bridges early on will help getting the signatures much quicker. But it sounds like an organization like that, trying to shift to a more agile approach, that really takes organizational change, right? The organization has to get behind an agile approach to doing, project management, moving to an agile org kind of model as well. That overhaul, that shift is really difficult, and it takes a lot of top-down change and a top-down leadership to make that kind of shift happen. It's very difficult, if you're kind of coming from the bottom up, to say, hey, I'm going to cut through this red tape, and I'm not getting all 32 signatures now. I'm going to introduce new terminology and just call it agile. Agile doesn't mean no planning, right? It just means that you have this iterative process. And again, fail off and fail quickly and get through those lessons learned. But I could say in a situation like that, identifying those 32 stakeholders, right, and trying to continue to work with that on the relationship side, not just purely the project side, is going to grease the skids in a way that'll help you kind of get through that a little easier.
Absolutely.
All
So
politics out here.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
I feel like that's the name of the game. So the case study that I was working on with with my ISACA team, my former ISACA team at Queens College, I was kind of mentoring them through that. And I think one thing that I would love for you to break down, maybe an example of one time this happened to you earlier in your career, or even today when you've seen it happen. A lot of times, the students at the beginning of the case would like to take facts that they heard and then just go point finger. It's that problem. That's the one problem. And I had to kind of work with them and mentor them and show them that there's not one problem. There's a slew of issues that conglomerates into one piece. And so you can't just fix one thing and say the whole problem is going to be solved. You can't point one finger and you can't black and white say that's the reason. And I would love if you have any experience or have had someone say something like that to you, kind of give your feedback for our younger audience.
I have to think through this one. So, I know with like some of our technology platform deployments, take a ServiceNow or SailPoint, you look at those and you look at the impact that it has on the organization, right? Because you're right, it's never just one thing, right? There's always a butterfly effect and unintended consequences of making changes like that. I think really as you go through any sort of major project, development or deployment of a new platform, et cetera, organizational change management, right? OCM. If you look that up, you'll see a lot of great nuggets in there about how to keep the organization aligned with the changes. That's through better, good communications, training opportunities, bite-sized waves of releases that help, help the stakeholders see the early results and start to use whatever maybe the new features or capabilities are. So I've had direct experience with that, and I think organizational change management is probably one of the best kind of disciplines to start to understand and learn about. As you create a project plan, you'll start to include additional steps. Oh, I need to make sure I have regular communications to the affected stakeholders. I need to have established training, for not only for the existing personnel, but also new personnel who are joining, who may have no clue how things are done, right? Process improvement is happening as not typically as a part of any sort of technology change. Is the processes around it may change as well. So all of that, good documentation, I think that's taken for granted a lot. Not actually thinking through the types of user guides that might need to be produced as a result of the effort you're undertaking. The actual development notes maybe, or the design documentation where you said this is why we're making certain decisions on certain features maybe, or why we're maybe omitting certain features right now and we want to put those in a later phase, design phase, whatever. So I think a lot of those components, if you bring those to bear, you're also going to find yourself in maybe it's a lot more work at first, but in the long run, it's a lot smoother of a rollout, and you'll find a lot more people be cheering you on as opposed to the haterade. So yeah.
And I feel like I've seen that a few times. I mean, that change management piece. I mean, when I was in consulting at KPMG, I mean, that was a huge piece, is understanding you put two organizations together, you pull them apart, what's going to happen, but we even saw with a company, we didn't directly work with them, but we're very familiar with them, and they have around 100 people. They changed their CRM system, and none of the processes related to that CRM system were updated. And so you have a bunch of people putting in uncurated data that would mess the system up. You'd have people not using the system the right way to its fullest capabilities. And then it's like, what are you paying for? Why are we even using this? You added this in to centralize everything, but you're centralizing garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
So I mean, even on smaller organizations, I mean, that's tremendous, is the people, getting the people in line with the technology. I saw one of those Elon Musk demographics where it was like everyone who understands technology is like up here, and then everybody else is like here.
Yeah.
And so to get everybody to the level where they can maybe like hear and just get it so they can use it the right way, I mean, that's a process in and of itself, So that's a really good point that you brought up there. And for our younger audience, the new shiny technology, a lot of our younger audience is like, oh, this is the new technology. I can't wait to use this in my real world environment. That's why I'm studying XYZ, whatever it is, whether it's a new coding language like Flutter or React Native, whatever the case may be. And then they get to industry and they're realizing, wait, nobody's using this.
Yep.
Why is nobody using this yet? They should be on this. But I think I would love to hear your perspective of like shiny new technology.
Yeah, I mean, especially like, as you join as maybe a junior dev, or you're coming in as a junior mid-level, employee, those are tools in your toolbox, right, that you're describing. And so you've got to understand the layout and the environment. What tools are they using in that environment, and show those use cases, right? Introduce it slowly. You don't want to totally break the way you can't tip over the apple cart, right? But you can certainly start replacing apples with pears here and there, right? And I think that incremental change is what's going to be important. We talked about building allies, right? So whether it be your peers, right? Whether it be maybe it's the manager, maybe it's maybe it's somebody in a different group, but slowly introducing and showing how those things can improve their work flows. You look at large language models and the impact that ChatGPT and all these other AI elements are having. You can't just shift the entire organization to start using that, right? You have to do slow and small use cases where it actually makes sense to maybe change the tool that you're using, right? I forget the saying, it's when you have a hammer, everything's a nail kind of thing, right? So if you are going to start using different tools and more discrete tools to maybe do, because they're not suited for everything, right? Different languages might be better for other purposes. And then again, culturally, right? People aren't able to do code review on your Flutter because they haven't used it and they don't know enough about it maybe. So I think it goes back to just that even if you're trying to make that organizational change from the bottom up, right? Show the value, show the use cases where it actually makes sense to use maybe a different tool over traditional tools, whatever they're using. But don't come in with the hubris, right? We're like, oh, nobody knows what they're doing. They should be using these. Clearly, these are the new shiny things we should be using. This place is in the dark ages, right? That's not going to make you any friends, right? You might get a tomato in the face. So, just work with what you got and work and engage with the people. Most people are willing to learn something new, especially if it makes their lives easier or if it's better. And so, just again, see what they're working on, see how they do it, and see where you can maybe introduce new processes, new tools, new approaches. And yeah, I think you'll be more successful attracting flies with the honey, right? So.
Show them the use cases and get them to believe in it from the use cases.
Yeah, prove it, right? I mean, you go in and talk is cheap, right? You got to prove it. Show me the tangible results. Show me how it saved me time. Show me how it saved me from rework. Show me how it was higher quality, whatever it may be, right? Just prove it.
Yeah, I love that you say that too. Because I've been in scenarios myself within trying to create change within an organization, and I'm over here putting on the dotted lines exactly how many minutes per person it's saving. It'll say, and when I talk to the exact, I know, right? You're laughing, and I literally like sent an email to the CEO of the company that I was working for at the time, and I said, I think that we should do this because I took track of every single person, and this is how much time they're spending per day on this, and I think that's why you should change it. And he came back to me, and he was like, great idea. but when I pitched it to the manager at the time, my manager was like, I don't care, whatever, it makes no sense. But as soon as you start putting time per person, right, exactly how much time in a week and how much time you save in a year, the average salary of that person, how much they're making per hour, and you just put a whole chart, they're like, okay, that's a great business.
What you're doing is you're quantifying it, and you're thinking like a business owner at that point, right? You're not just doing development work. You're not just a technologist, right? You're thinking more broadly. You're thinking more strategically. And I've gone through that exercise many times where you're like, hey, we got to make 100 widgets a day, and how many people does it take to make one widget, right? And you have to start really looking at, am I properly staffed? I keep saying I need more people. But now you can show in quantitative ways, the measures for it, and you can show the outcome. Look, if I don't make 100 widgets, let's say I make 80 widgets, what's the negative outcome? Maybe I have a regulatory concern or a compliance issue, right? Maybe I have an operational concern or reputational issue. Maybe strategically we can't meet certain goals because I can't make it as many widgets as you're expecting. Or maybe I'm making 100 widgets a day because that's what the policy says, but I can change the policy to where I only need to make 80 widgets a day. So you have to really figure out what are the requirements and do exactly what you did, right? Is to quantify it and bounce it against those requirements. But communicating it in terms that the business leaders understand, that definitely will get you more traction. So.
And with everything that we were talking about, it kind of ties in as well.
Yeah.
So now let's switch into a little bit more of a tactical, I guess, crash recovery standpoint. So have you been in the situation where you've pitched a project, everyone's ready to go, and then either A, you messed up, somebody else messed up, something didn't actually fit together the way that you thought it was going to go, and now it's like, you know what, mission abort, this is not going the right direction that we want it to. How do you now reel back the reins and say, I was wrong, not, how do you, what's that conversation like? That's a difficult conversation.
A lot of people, I think the ego is strong, right? With all of us, right? And we want to be the best we can be, and we don't want to admit failure, right? But if you really care about the organization and you really are going to show that, you're going to say, look, let's not throw good money after bad. Maybe we did make the wrong decision and we need to pull back, right? Let's take a strategic pause, whatever term, whatever, consulting term you want to use, right? And just have the hard conversation, right? Say, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what the data shows us, right? I'll try to be objective as possible. Hopefully, if you were very open and honest and objective going into it, right, it's easier, and you built the trust, right? And they'll when you come to them, you can say, we went through it. Especially if you chunked it in waves, right? Hey, we did the proof of concept. We did wave one. It's not really working out as great as we thought, or maybe it is more complex than we initially assessed it to be. And just be honest. I think we talk about the relationships and the trust that you have to build. If you wear your ego on your shoulders, right, no matter what the situation, but especially when you're spending people's time and resources, right, and you can't overcome your own ego and hubris to admit when you're wrong, that's gonna show pretty obvious pretty quickly to people, and you're gonna lose their trust. And you all know it's much harder to regain trust than it is to have it. And so, yeah, I think that's right. You've got to just be honest about the results of what's happening, and come up with alternatives. Don't just say, "Oh, it didn't work out. Sorry," and then move on. Let's do an analysis. What happened? Why did it fail? What did we not? Maybe there's a technique called the 5 whys. So you can say, you kind of go deeper and deeper and understand truly why did something fail, or why did it occur or not go as planned. And what could you do to improve it so you avoid that pitfall next time, right? And I think, just like your, stock trades, when you have strategies, you might also want to think through that beforehand, right? What criteria would constitute us pulling the plug on this thing, right? No one wants to think about failure up front, right? But I don't know if it's quite like a prenup, but you want to have something in place where you've already thought through, right? And if things don't work out, what are the consequences of that? And at what point is it the right time to pull the plug? So.
And I feel like as a cyber, in the cybersecurity field, and cybersecurity professionals, that's kind of like ingrained in like your skill set already, right? So it's look for what could go wrong. Assess the risk on, pushing these things. Well, if this doesn't happen, what are we going to do in the meantime? Or what's the workaround, right? Comparatively with the other, business units that won't think as similarly like that. And they're like, okay, well, we need to teach ourselves that skill. Comparatively with like, that's a skill that we use on a day-to-day basis.
That's true. That is true. I haven't thought about it in that way, but definitely we are risk, not that we're risk averse, but we are risk hungry. We want to know what is the risk, right? We want to think about it in all the different scenarios and the ways that it could go wrong or it could go right. And so I think those skill sets, are natural to security professionals, especially as you kind of go down that career path more and more. And those who end up in a GRC kind of a role where they're doing day-to-day, they're doing risk evaluations. If you're more on the maybe operational side, you might think about availability a lot, but you may not think about confidentiality and integrity of certain data and transactions as much, right? So I think security staff have to understand not only the operational impacts and the availability impacts, but the total gamut. So certainly, yeah, do use those risk skills and do that assessment up front.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, and this is more for the cybersecurity guys, but there's always a fine line between your security and then your, I guess, flow of operations. The more security you have, generally, the more difficult operations flow. So when you are pitching to a stakeholder, hey, let's secure this, or let's do X, Y, Z, and helping them quantify that, how do you pair that with maybe the time constraint or the user experience,
You often hear about shifting left, right? Because what's more expensive than taking the time to implement and harden and do the right security controls up front is the bad thing happens, right? And you're doing rework, right? Or you have a breach and you have, a bad day, bad week, bad month, where you've got a breach happening. And I think that if you can articulate that, look, we're here to help you. We're trying to get you where you want to be, but safely, right? We want to work with you early on in the design phase. We want to do early on. We want to identify, do threat modeling, take the steps, take the time to think through what could go wrong. I often say that hacking is using something for an unintended purpose, right? So they may be, I often give a physical example of like the mail slot on your front door. That mail slot was designed for mail to go through, right? But somebody can stick their arm through and unlock the door, right? They've hacked it, and they're using it for an unintended purpose. So if you can talk with your security professionals and the risk guys, they're going to help you understand what might, you're developing, ABC thing, but they're going to think through, right, ways that it can be abused. And if you do that up front, instead of waiting until you're ready to publish and go to production, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and a lot of money, frankly, having to do that rework, right? And certainly a lot of reputation and operational impact if you did push it forward and you did have a breach and you're like, we'll wait till the pen test, right? That's way too late in the game if you're waiting that far long. So again, design phase, of course, there's SAST and DAST and other kinds of, code testing and different approaches. But the earlier on you do it, the better off you are for sure. And I think being able to again, build that relationship, have that conversation, make sure they understand you're an ally in this. You're not there to cause delays, but you do want to, build those relationships and communicate that.
Do you think that's also the reason why these DevSecOps roles are being pushed a lot more from that line of thinking?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's a little bit of a name game, DevSecOps, SecDevOps, whatever. But integrating security into the work process is the key, right? You cannot create it in a silo, right? You talk about agile teams, right? That's kind of the point, right? You want those SMEs to bring their knowledge together to work more quickly, those iterative processes, right? So I think if you've got the right cultural mindset, you won't run into a lot of resistance around, including security teams in the design phase with your architects and those folks. So,
well, we always love to end the podcast off with one last question, and you probably know the question if you listen to any of the other podcast episodes. Because we have a CISO on today, we're going to ask the question: for a director trying to become a CISO, what are your recommendations? How is that pathway, and how can they do it too?
So the first thing is, do you want to be the CISO? Because a lot of times people think they want to be the CISO, and the more you get into that information, that chief role, the less you're doing the hands-on keyboard, the fun stuff that you kind of grew up into this space with, right? So be mindful that as you become a CISO, you're going to be doing more managerial work, more reporting, more metrics, more communicating with the lines of business and communicating with the board, which can be fun, right? It can be like, oh, I'm ready for that, I want to do that. But you find that is where your time sits, right? You do a lot more risk management and discussions at the business level, which is a lot of fun and it's great. But if you came up and you love, banging on boxes and building things, you'll be doing a lot less of that. So just first know, is it something you want to do? Then, I think understanding, trying to learn the language of the business. I went and got my MBA because I knew I didn't have the business acumen. I did not have the business chops to be able to have those conversations with the marketing team and the finance team and all the different teams that I would need to interface with to make a difference in an organization. So I was great technically, but and you got to be really. That wasn't something I kind of knew natively. I had to be embarrassed a couple times, right? Where maybe I didn't know the answer to something, or I didn't know the right questions to ask, and I just kind of fell flat because I'm just more of a techie operational guy, right? So I think rounding out your business acumen is going to set you up for a lot of success going forward. That's an underappreciated skill set to be able to translate the ones and zeros into dollars and cents and be able to speak that language. But if you do those things and you go and you get your qualifications, right, you whether it be academics or whether it be certifications, make sure that you have some of those under your belt. And then finally, your network, right? Your network is going to be probably the most important thing that gets you an opportunity to interview, right? Much less to actually just get you the job, but just getting your foot in the door to have that interview with the hiring manager and go through that process. And even if you get an opportunity to go and interview for like a CISO role or a deputy CISO role or whatever it may be, even if it's in an organization you don't really want to be in, take the opportunity to have take that experience, right? You never know what it may spur off. I think, and even if you do not get selected for a role, every time you interview, you'll get better and better and better. And so I think, tap in your network, let people know that you are open for those opportunities. And I think, preparation and opportunity intersecting, right, leads to success. So don't give up on your dreams, and don't give up on yourself, and don't be too hard on yourself, right? It's tough out there. And last thing I'll say is mental health is important. So make sure you've got a strategy to take care of yourself and don't get too mired up in the rat race. So
the meditation, some morning walks, anything that gets you along the line.
There you go.
Right. But thank you so much, Brian, for being on the podcast and sharing your wealth of knowledge, your insightful overview of the landscape, that some people may not have. Right. So it was a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thanks for listening in to the Ocean of Technology podcast.
We post every Tuesday, so set your automations and hit that follow button.
Do you need a life jacket?
We have an extensive bench of onshore professionals ready to take your projects to the next level.
Because we solve problems,
not just fill roles.
We are Ocean.